So for this project, I'm going to be showing you how to sprout lentils. We'll be painting a jar, and these are the lentils that you're going to need for this project. These are organic French lentils. You can use a wide variety of other beans and seeds as well, like alfalfa, clover, peas, mung beans, beets. You need to do your research though, because you want to avoid things, for example, like kidney beans, as they are toxic as sprouts if eaten raw. You're going to want a glass jar. I'm choosing one with a wide opening because it will allow more airflow. You could cover the jar in tulle, which is a fabric netting, and put a rubber band on it. They sell sprouting jars that have a lid with a net, but you can make your own. I'm going to be using acrylic paints. I really enjoyed Jane Davenport's paints. They're really beautiful pigment, and I like the colors and the way that they spread. You can also use craft acrylic paints that are cheaper as well. I just don't like them as much, but use what you have. You'll need some water and a variety of paintbrushes. For this project, I'm going to be using some very small ones, some different shapes. You're going to want some real pointy ones, so you can get some little details, and a paper towel or a rag, some kind of a palette. I'm going to be using a plate for this because I'm going to want to be mixing the colors. It'll just be a little easier. Because the paints that I'm using are non-toxic, it's okay to use them on a plate that you would eat from. Just be aware of that. I'm going to be using photographs from the internet. I went to the Ojai Valley Land Conservancy to find some photos, and some of my favorite flowers are the wild lupine, and I also chose California Loosestrife. I think I'm pronouncing that right, because I thought that the colors complemented the lupine nicely and worked well. So you want to make sure that your jar is clean and sanitized and you get the sticker off of it. This was a dill pickle jar. Something perfect for this project. So I'm going to be using this beautiful lavender color from Jane's line, some white, this blue, which is super lovely, and I think we all need to let Jane know that we want her to continue making this paint. This blue, this color is magnificent. The way the pigment works is just lovely. If you add more water to it, it kind of creates watercolor washes. And Jane, if you're listening, we just really want this paint, please. Also this bright magenta color. And this bright green. So I'm going to be starting with a very skinny brush, and I don't want to make a very opaque line because I don't want the green to really show up under the lavender. Since they're sort of almost opposite on the color wheel, it would look kind of muddy, but it just allows me to see the direction of where the flower goes if it's on there real thinly, and it will dry quickly enough that it will layer on top quickly as well. So you can see I'm using a slightly larger round brush here and images off the internet for inspiration. And I'm just going to begin making the lupine shape. You can see how it's starting off real small at the tip. Just making sort of like teardrop dragged shapes. And the harder you push, the wider the bristles on the brush fan out to make a wider shape. So I want the paint to be somewhat thin so that it will dry quickly enough that I can add layers to it without having to wait for a really long time. But before it dries, I'm going back in with this magenta-y color and blending that into parts of the lavender. And I don't want this to look the same all over. I'm adding a little bit more of the magenta in some places and a little less in others so that it has a little natural variation. I think that just creates a more realistic effect. I also really want to point out that I'm not going for anything that looks super botanically correct. This is more just sort of getting the essence of the flower and having some fun. This is intended to be a beginner's painting lesson and or a project that you can use with your kids, because we know they're all pretty bored right now and stuck at home on the lockdown, so I'm trying to come up with things that you can do with them to create a little fun and a little magic in their lives. I'm going in with this blue. I wanted to just pick up just a little bit so that it'll add a little bit of depth at the base of the flower. And what that's going to do is not only give it some variation in color, but having the contrast between light and dark really helps create the illusion of something being three-dimensional. So here's the basic shape. I'm rinsing my brush. You want to make sure that you dry it in between switching colors so that you don't have runny paint. And I'm going to be adding some white at the very tips. And this will also help that wide variation between light and dark will give it more of a three-dimensional effect. And in addition to that, if you look at a real lupin flower, generally the tips are white. So it just really helps give it a little bit more of a realistic feeling. Again, not really going for specific botanical correctness. This is really supposed to be a project that's more about fun. We need more fun, right? Okay, so that was pretty small. To make it a little easier for you, I'm going to be doing this quick painting again on a larger piece of paper so that you can see a little better what I've done. And I'm using Jane Davenport's beautiful journal. The paper's lovely. And a larger brush so that you can see what it is that I'm doing. I'll be painting a little bit larger. So again, I'm keeping this area really sparse. I can see the direction of the stem and the structure of it, but not wanting the green to really show up in that space because I want the lavender and the pink to be the showcase. You can see how I push a little harder and then pick the brush up, and I'm not wanting to have the flower look the same everywhere. It's a little bit random. There is a pattern to it, but it's also a little bit of a sort of free form at the same time, kind of wild looking. I mean, it's a wildflower. I just love them. Once you get the hang of it, you can go pretty quickly, as you can see. I don't want to go down to the whole bottom of the stem, and adding in that magenta while the lavender paint is still wet so that it'll just blend in a little more easily. Making sure to let the pink be a little brighter in some places and a little less in others, just to give it that natural variation. Now normally if I was doing a painting, I would have a light blue background washed in ahead of it. And I would also want to be using the shape of the lupin leaves because they are really interesting. But for the painting on the jar, I really want to have, I don't want it to be really solidly painted in, because I want light to come into the sprouts, and I also want you to be able to see the sprouts. I want the painting to look pretty sparse. So I'm not going to be painting the beautiful leaf structure of a lupin just because I just want it to be simpler and more spread out. So I'm just going to be using blades of grass instead. But again, I think if I was just doing this as a painting on a piece of paper, I would approach this painting a little differently. So you can see every time I change colors, if I want to dry the brush off if I rinsed it off. So that blue ended up a little stronger than I wanted, so I was trying to wipe some of the paint off of the brush onto the plate and ended up adding a little bit of water to it just to thin it out a little bit more. You can see how that kind of thinned the paint out a little bit, and I'm only using the one dip in the paint to spread this paint throughout the rest of the flower so that it's not too dark. But that deep contrast, you see how that instantly gave it a three-dimensional effect. Not going for perfection again, just really focusing on having fun. So you can see a little better with this larger image. I wanted to make sure you could see that clearly. So now I'm coming in with the light green paint and a real skinny brush to add the stems of the lupin. I don't want them going in the same direction. I want them to have a little bit of variation. And I don't want them too close together because I'm trying to leave the painting sparse so that you can see through it again. And in some cases I'm going to want them overlapping one another and going in different directions, so it just has a little more natural, wild feel to it. So I'm going to be repeating this process for the rest of the lupin. So I thought it would be a good time to talk about the science behind sprouting. And the process makes it easier for your body to absorb the nutrients. Sprouts have a lot of iron, zinc, vitamin C. They're high in amino acids and proteins, and they have beneficial enzymes and phytochemicals. Sprouting breaks down a seed so that it takes less work for your body to digest it. It's also really good for your digestive system. So if you think about it, that little tiny seed has everything in it that it needs to create an entire plant. So there's a lot of wonderful nutrition in this tiny little thing. It's kind of beautiful magic, isn't it? So I wanted to take a moment to also talk to you about the safety. Like all foods, sprouts are susceptible to foodborne bacteria. So proper growing and handling and storage is important. If you're improperly producing them or storing them, in the worst case scenario, sprouts can harbor E. coli and salmonella. I mean, don't get too freaked out because, I mean, this can happen with romaine lettuces we've seen. So you just need to take it seriously. If you're concerned, or if you have like a sensitive immune system, or you're pregnant and you're just really worried, you can always cook the sprouts. Just cook them enough to the temperature that you would cook chicken, for example, and it will definitely kill anything that's in there. If you're noticing that they have any kind of funky smell, they always say in a restaurant, when in doubt, throw it out. So just keep that in mind. And the most important thing is to be rinsing them well with clean water so that you know they're safe. And I really think in most cases it's not an unsafe thing. But again, if you're concerned, just cook them. They're healthier for you raw though, so it's just neat to get to have the opportunity to create food in your own home. So situations where foodborne bacteria is growing in sprouts is more likely in the case of store-bought sprouts because they have already been stored for a period of time before you eat them, and they're going through more people handling them. It's just different. Bacteria grows in a warm, moist environment, and this is why it's important to rinse them 2 times a day and let them dry before storage, and eat them as soon as possible. Don't let them just sit in your refrigerator all moist and festering in there. I really enjoy adding sprouts into wraps and sandwiches and salads. I was thinking about starting some mung bean sprouts. I haven't tried that one yet. That would be really good in stir fries. So there's a lot of variety there. So here I'm showing you how to paint the California Loosestrife. I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. It's a really loose, sweet little pink flower. I mixed the magenta with some white, so you know that those colors are already working well together because they're from the same palette. It's a good idea to limit the amount of colors that you're using in your painting. And then I'm coming in the center with a little darker line of color. So you can see this is painted really super loosely, just 5 petals, and I didn't even include the little stamen in the center which has yellow because I'm keeping this painting really simple, because you can see this is blown up, and on the jar it's going to be very small. So here are the little darker pink centers, just to add a little variety and bring the pink that's in the lavender forward so that you just get a little more variety of color. This is a very soft, analogous color palette. That means that those are colors that are close to each other on the color wheel. So think if you had red, orange, yellow, those are next to each other on the color wheel, and that would create a very warm feeling. Whereas these are much cooler colors. Creates a very calming sort of color palette. It's really sweet and springy, and I really enjoy it. So this is really simple, and I think it was a lot of fun, and I really think that even if you didn't make it perfect, it's going to come out looking good if you looked closely. Honestly, I made a lot of mistakes. It came out really well anyway. It's just loose and fun. So I'm going to be showing you how to create the actual sprouts. See how I left a lot of space for the light to come in. So again, you can use a big variety of stuff, but these are French lentils. They're a little bit smaller than regular lentils, and I'm using organic ones. Because the paint isn't cured yet, I don't want to risk getting the jar wet, so I'm using this plastic container to soak them in initially. So you want to rinse them with some clean, cool water. You can see how you don't need to have a netting or a strainer on the top in order to produce sprouts. I'm just gently pouring the water out and using my hand, which is clean, to collect any that spill out. You want to get the majority of that water out so they're not sitting in any stagnant water. This is how you would rinse them if you were rinsing them every day, but I'm going to be soaking them overnight. Different seeds need different amount of time to soak, so you need to research what it is that you're specifically sprouting. But these lentils will sprout best if you let them soak overnight first. So tomorrow I'm going to be rinsing them twice a day, and I will be including them in the jar. I wanted to show you what I did with a little bit of leftover of Jane's blue paint. See how it gets kind of washy down toward the bottom? I don't like to waste paint, so we're adding it to a journal page for a future painting, just as a way of giving a little homage to Jane's paint and saying thank you. And here is the painting that I did with the rest of the paint, just to continue the Lupine. And it was really fun. It's really simple. It's going to be a really fun project for your family. I hope you really enjoyed it. And let me know which wildflowers are your favorite wildflowers. There are so many that I love so much. And thank you all for joining me today. So please like and subscribe. You can also find me online at robinsnestartschool.com.